Free slice is best on 6x6 and up, and then...
I don't think Yau is gonna take 5x5 plus by storm.
Timon Kolasiński just got the world record 5x5 single, an incredible solve with fluid turning, amazing efficiency, and just enough of that luck factor. It's special for a lot of reasons. It's the first 5x5 WR in 12 years not held by Max Park or Felix Zemdeks. It's the first official sub 32 ever. It means that Kolasiński has now gotten a world record in 3 events, an accomplishment shared by just a few other GOATs. And yet none of these reasons fully capture why this WR is so important, because this record represents the culmination of over 15 years of innovations in hardware, theory, and speed solving. It's been in the making for longer than Wang Yiheng has been alive. To fully understand the magnitude of this record, we have to take a trip to the beginning. The very beginning. Traditionally, 4x4 has always been solved using the reduction method, or redux for short. With the redux method, you solve the centers and then the edges. It's intuitive enough and it was good enough for most. However, as you get faster, a major problem reveals itself. See that? That was a big rotation and it was necessary to do because the edges on the bottom weren't solved. These rotations can take up to a second, which is a major time loss. This problem is compounded by how difficult look ahead is when you can't see most of the edges. Almost inevitably, you will find yourself pausing for small amounts of time after rotating. Last but not least, the transition from reduction to 303 stage is way too abrupt. Cross edges are usually all over the cube, and solving them pauselessly is way too difficult. Speedcubing legend Eric Ackersdyke noticed these problems and began to theorycraft. After solving the first 2 centers, he came up with the idea of solving the 3 cross edges and attaching them to the final center. Then, one could solve the centers using R wide and U moves. Then solve the final cross edge into the bottom and you're done. Since all the bottom layer edges are solved, Z2 rotations aren't necessary, and edge pairing can be done much faster. In 2009, Robert Yau combined this concept with Yuhei Amura and Chris Hardwick's edge pairing concepts to create the method we now know as Yau. This was a crazy innovation and revolutionized the event, leading to a new wave of WRs. Most notable of these was Sebastian Weier's 30.81 world record average, which was a 3-second drop. And if you want to learn more about that, click the top right corner. However, some people noticed that Yau was more versatile than was originally thought to be. The problems with look ahead and redux to cross transitions were also problems on big cubes. Heck, with how many pieces there were, the problem of look ahead was much more severe with big cubes. Yet, it became obvious that moving up the ladder this way brought its own, let's say, issues. Yau has nothing but upsides when it comes to edges. The cross edges can be solved in fewer moves than usual, as you don't have to worry about center preservation. The last H edges can be solved without any X2 or Z2 flips, and you can turn faster due to improved look ahead. The cost of Yau comes when considering centers. The handicap due to the removal of F, D, B, and L moves ends up adding a lot to the center split. On 4x4, this is fine, as centers take up barely any time at all. But on 5x5 and up, centers take up more of the solve and Yau becomes a few dozen moves longer. The increased look ahead for Yau does allow for higher TPS, which is the reason why most cubers choose CFOP over Ru. But the problem is that we're talking about big cubes here, and big cubes are notorious for sucking in terms of hardware. You can't spam TPS on a V-cube. This didn't stop people from trying to make Yau work. In 2012, Robert Yau created Yau 5, which made the solve more efficient by solving 2 F-dual pairs in the back. In 2013, Jacob Ambrose created the Ambrose method, which we now know as half centers. But from 2009 to 2013, there weren't any truly amazing results using Yau 5 on 5x5. That's not to say that there weren't any great results. Robert Yau was getting some pretty solid times, but it's not like anybody believed in the method yet, aside from Robert. At least not as much as they should have. That was until the first wave. From late 2013 to mid 2015, there was a spike in 5x5 South American records. The SAR average dropped 19 seconds due to the efforts of just one solver. His name was Pedro Roque. This guy was solving out of his mind. He was 4th in the world for single and 10th in the world for average at his peak. And he did all this using Yau 5. At home, he was somehow getting singles that were crazier, dropping 56s and even a sub 50 single. He was beating Robert Yau using his own method. Jaden McNeil also took up Yau 5, got some really strong results with it, with a 118 average. This was not as strong as Roque or Robert's results, but it was still super insane for the time. Similarly, Justin Thomas was able to get some really solid times using Yau 5, such as a 114 average and a 107 single. And there are probably a few people I'm missing to be honest, but the two people at the top were Pedro Roque with a 102 SAR average and Robert Yau with a 56-96 ER single. Interestingly, McNeil and Roque had their own edits to the method. Roque ended up solving the first 4 cross edges before the last 4 centers. He then attached the remaining cross edge to the 2x3 center block and carried on with centers. This made his last cross edge much more efficient, but resulted in a less efficient 3rd center. McNeil used the Ambrose method. He solved 3 2x3 blocks like this, and then used R wide and U moves to solve the rest of the centerpieces. This ended up being much more ergonomic and efficient for Yau 5 when compared to the normal 1 center at a time method. The trade-off was that look ahead became slightly more difficult to do because of the unsolved bars in the bottom and the back. Both of these small changes made Yau 5 a bit better and a bit more powerful when compared to Redux, and at the end of it all, Yau 5 was closer than ever before to overtaking Redux. In July 2015, the Yau 5 WR was 102, and the Redux WR was 51.93. Well, that's 10 seconds faster. World-class big cube solver Caitlin Hutnick made a video about this, essentially saying that she never thought Yau 5 would be on the same level as Redux. Even McNeil somewhat agreed, saying the top people with Redux would likely never switch to Yau. We still had a lot of ground to cover. The Qi Wu cubes were some of the most influential cubes in history. Their big cubes were unmatched in quality from the Wu Chui to the Wu Ji. There were no other cubes on the level of the Wu line, and they sat on their thrones for years after their release. The Wu Shuang, which was released in late 2016, was the 5x5 in this line of cubes. It was so good that Felix managed to drop the world record by 2 seconds upon its release, down to a 47.88. Lockups and catches were still common. The Wu Shuang was also very slow, but nobody really cared because it was beyond every other cube on the market. You couldn't spam TPS on the V cube, but you could on a Wu Shuang. Because of this increase in the TPS ceiling, Yau 5 became more of a popular option. Efficiency wasn't as big a problem, and this caught the attention of Matt's Valk. You may know Valk from
Sam! Yeah!
He was 2nd in the world for 3x3 for ages. In 5x5, he was a Dutch NR holder, but he didn't even have a sub 1 average in early 2016. But with the Wu Shuang, in the span of a single competition, Valk went from not even having a sub 1 average to getting a sub 50 single. He got double ERs with a 49.49 and a 56.72, which were WR2 and WR4 respectively. And he did this with Yau. Combining this with the fact that Robert Yau got the ER single just a few months back, and you can see why people began to take Yau 5 seriously. In the first episode of Tuesday Tips, Kevin Hayes said that Yau 5 was around as good as Redux, citing Valk as one of the reasons. Valk traded ERs with Sebastian Wire for a while, and improved to a 53.79 average in 2017. This was 5th in the world, behind Zemdegs, Hayes, Nahm, and Wire, and it was the most competitive Yau solving we've ever seen. This inspired other cubers to follow suit. Evan Liu got a 146 6x6 mean and a 139 6x6 single, both with Yau 5, which were WR6 and WR5 respectively. Jaden McNeil was still tempting people to come to the dark side in the background. And yet, most didn't see Yau as equivalent to Redux. It was still clearly the underdog. And aside from one top-notch video by Jaden McNeil, most Yau solvers weren't widely sharing their knowledge. What we needed wasn't just somebody who used the method in God-solid times. We needed more than that. We needed an ambassador for the method. What are the requirements to be a successful ambassador for a method? To figure this out, I have 3 case studies of successful method ambassadorship. The first case study is Tommy Cherry with 7 Simul. The first thing Cherry had was speed. He held both WRs in 2023 and is the current world and national champion. The second thing he had was innovation. Cherry aided with the development of the Tommy pin order, which everyone now uses. It's possible to be a successful ambassador without directly crafting the method, but it certainly helped with Cherry's credibility. The third and perhaps most important thing was communication. Cherry had a big following on social media and created one of the first 7 Simul tutorials on the internet. It was simple, to the point, and clear. Most people who use 7 Simul now learned from this video. His efforts were well rewarded given that 7 Simul is the method that everyone uses now. The second case study is Dr. Jessica Friedrich with CFOP. Dr. Friedrich was very fast, podiuming at Worlds 2003 and ranking 2nd in the world. She was certainly an innovator, creating the OLL and PLL algorithms herself. Finally, she had communication, with a well-made website that outlined every step of CFOP in detail. The third and final case study is Ciarán Beahan with Yau. After 7 consecutive 5x5 European records by Sebastian Weyer, someone had to step in and break the streak. That someone was Ciarán Beahan. He got the first sub-50 5x5 average in Europe, which was 5th in the world at that time. He improved to a 45.19 average by the end of the year. At his peak, he was 3rd in the world, just behind Max Park and Felix Zemdegs. Unlike Roque and Valk, Beahan wasn't just a 5x5 solver. He had a chokehold on the 6 and 7 scene in Europe using Yau. He was less than a second from beating Max Park in 6x6. His accomplishments meant that other cubers were forced to confront that Yau could be faster than Redux. Beahan was also an innovator. With Robert Yau's Yau 5, before doing L4E, you would first solve 2 adjacent F12 pairs into the back. After this, you could solve the remaining edges using cycles. This was thought to be faster, but it limited freedom in the free slice step, and it made F12 recognition worse for the first 2 pairs. Beahan used a much more freeform approach, incorporating slice flip slice and other Redux techniques into his solves. He used a 5-move trigger to move 2 of the unsolved edges into the top, allowing for the use of cycles without solving any F12 pairs. These techniques ended up being faster, as outlined by this Jaden McNeil video. Finally, Beahan was an outstanding communicator. In 2020, he made a video about why Yau was better than Redux for 5x5. This was an extremely strong pro-Yau stance that nobody fast had ever taken before. He followed this with a bunch of Yau-specific advice, all of which was gold. I remember watching these videos just soaking up all this high-quality content. His insights got a lot of people to engage with the issues on hand, and sparked a community-wide discussion on the subject. In the end, it was super effective. In 2019, 2 out of the top 10 used Yau. In 2022, that number doubled, with 4 out of the top 10 using Yau, and in March 2023, we were up to 7 out of the top 10 using Yau. Beahan's influence is as clear as day. Yau had gone from unviable to another option and had finally become the dominant method. And yet, there was one person who didn't use Yau. Unfortunately for the future of Yau, that person was the world record holder. Park's complete domination of big cubes during these last 6 years remains the greatest feat in cubing history. From 2019 to 2023, all but 2 world records in 4x4, 5x5, 6x6, and 7x7 have been by Max Park. You heard me right. Aside from Sebastian's 4x4 WRs in 2019, over these 4 years, every single world record in 4 of the most competitive events in speed cubing has been by the same person. That alone would put him in another league, but his world records aren't just faster than everybody else, they're much faster. There was a time where Max was 10 entire seconds faster than second place in 7x7. That's like somebody having a lead of half a second in 3x3. Wait a minute, for the purposes of this video though, there's one slight problem. Max was a Redux user. This was a major blow against Yau advocates. Park was so consistently excellent that anybody who talked about Yau 5 was forced to talk about him. Redux advocates stood behind Park, using him as a reason to stick with the method. So, why did Park use Redux? Full disclaimer, I don't exactly have hard evidence to justify the claims that I will make here. This is purely conjecture. Given how many people have been trying Yau over the past decade, I'm sure Park has considered Yau in the past. There are 2 reasons why that effort may have failed. The first reason is that hardware just wasn't good enough yet. Park may have tried to make the switch when the Yushin 5x5 was still being used. He wouldn't have able to reach the TPS needed to make Yau worth it, so he discarded it altogether. For the record, I don't think this is what happened. The second and much more likely reason is that Yau just didn't work for him. This initially seems absurd, given how Yau on 5x5 seems to work for literally everyone else. But it makes sense once you realize that Max Park is simply built different. The problem with Redux is that look ahead is too hard, but Park doesn't seem to have this problem. If you look at his edge pairing, it is flawless. Compare this to a solver like Felix Zemdix or Patrick Ponce who have pauses in their edge pairing. Granted, they're very slight, but they are there. And they were the reason that these two solvers later switched to Yau. So given all this, why would Park make the switch? He doesn't need the look ahead buff from Yau. And so the trade-off of efficiency for look ahead isn't worth it to him. IMO, this is what happened. But the only person who knows the truth is Park himself. The only thing we did know was that it would take nothing short of a miracle to take the 5x5 WR away from Max Park. On October 1st, 2021, Tymon Kolasiński got a 39.79 ER average. This was within a second of Max Park, and it was the closest anyone had been to Park in years. Kolasiński got this average using Yau. This was evidence that Yau could operate on the same level as Redux, but it wasn't WR. Kolasiński ramped up the pressure with two ER singles, a 33.90 and a 33.60. These were the second and third best times ever when he got them, and they were less than a second away from the world record. Ciarán Nahm broke into the conversation in 2023 with a 39.67 average with Yau. The times he was getting at home were crazier, with a 39.83 average of 25. His 6 and 7 results were also stellar, and he got double ASRs in both events. We had two men, both a good comp away from breaking the WR average. At Worlds 2023, Kolasiński was able to beat Park in the second round with a European record average. Before this moment, Park's victory felt certain, but if Tymon pulled something off... In finals, Tymon won the first 3 solves, and Park got a counting 42. However, Park then clutched a counting 37, and won by just 0.25 seconds. To put that in perspective, if any one of Kolasiński's counting times was just 6 moves shorter, he would have beat Max Park. The pressure kept on ramping up. Both these amazing solvers were improving their times faster than Max Park was, and it was only a matter of time. In November 2023, Nahm got a 37.90 5x5 average. In December 2023, Nahm got an average with 36.43 BPA, which was sub-WR, along with a 33.82 single. So the community knew that 2024 would be the year Yau would get its first big cube WR. On February 3rd, 2024, Nahm got a 33.10 5x5 single. This was the closest anyone had been to the single WR in a long time. However, that wasn't the craziest thing that happened that day. In the second round of 6x6, he pulled off something truly amazing.
Free slice is best on 6x6 and up, and then
Never gonna dominate 5x5 plus the way that it...
Over the past 6 years, many have tried to break through Max Park's big cube domination. In the end, it took the return of one of the greatest cubers of the 2010s to pull off the first big cube WR with Yau. And then, it was Tymon's turn. In July of 2024, Kolasiński would compete against Park for the first time in 11 months. Kolasiński was getting tons of insane 5x5 averages, so people were prepared for an absurd head-to-head. But in round 2, Park got a WR average and Kolasiński didn't even get sub 40. Maybe it wouldn't be that close. But then, for the first time in 7 years, Park lost a 5x5 competition. Against all odds, Kolasiński beat him with a 37-27 European record average. This was the first time that Yau proved to be better in a final as big as this. And on September 28th, Kolasiński went to DuPage Fall 2024. 5 years since his first NR. 4 years since his first ER. 12 years since Robert Yau created Yau 5. On the first solve of the final round, Kolasiński did this. That's the story so far. From Jacob Ambrose to Janos Bereski, from Pedro Roque to Patrick Ponce, that was a semi-complete history of Yau. The story is not over. Most current Big Cube WRs are using Redux, and there's still yet to be a 7x7 world record with Yau. Although for the record, Nahm is only 3 seconds away from that. But 2024 will go down as the end of an era that lasted 2 decades, from the beginning of the WCA to the moment Nahm stopped the timer on his world record meme. Cubing theory continues to evolve in almost every event. Who knows what methods we'll be using in another 20 years. What I do know is that it will be a hell of a ride before we get there. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Kate Graham for helping me with some of the research, and Mark Zimmerman and Simply Cubing for reviewing the script. I had a blast working on this video. It was a very well-researched video in my opinion, and definitely took a lot of time, but I hope it's worth it. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe.